Hi, guys. Sorry I don't have any entertaining pictures for you. The Saturday before the end of Thanksgiving break was a slow day. It was gloomy out, the type of day that makes you want to curl up in your blankets and never get out of bed. But my mom had been complaining about the kitchen not being painted yet, so I decided to do something productive with my day and take on the chore. I put on some music and started painting. The monotony of the job made my mind wander, and I started thinking about oratory, this speech. I would like to preface the speech with an apology to Mr. McVeigh for lying all semester. Despite a genuine attempt to write a lighthearted speech about my favorite color, which is orange, by the way, I didn't really want to get up here and do that. I know how it sounds. Did I really spend the last 2.5 months of my life working on a speech that I would end up scrapping last minute? Does anyone want to guess the answer to that question? Yes. Um, but I promise it wasn't on purpose. I just couldn't bring myself to face what I really wanted to talk about. But two things prompted me to change my topic. The first happened early last year during that weird period of time during COVID where we had live stream chapels. If you remember the chapel streams, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I'm not surprised because who actually went to those? But that particular chapel had a student speaker scheduled, and I wanted to show my support. The student got up there and spoke about going through something really hard in his life, how it affected him, and what lessons he learned. I remember thinking how brave it was that he was able to get up there and be so vulnerable, speaking on something so personal and painful. A lot of what the student said stuck with me because I thought, how can this kid get up there and share so much with the community he barely knows? It was a lesson in trust. The second was Julia Moore's oratory speech. Julia Moore was a senior at Brooks a few years back, before us seniors were even freshmen. You guys in my oratory class were there that Saturday when Mr. McVeigh had us watch Julia's speech. It was a beautiful and striking yet tragic account of her own personal battle and acceptance of her father's struggle with depression and eventual suicide. I really can't speak for her, so when you have the time, I urge you to go watch it on YouTube. It struck me differently, though. I mean, really struck me. You guys know. After we finished watching the speech, I bolted to the bathroom to cry. I came back and tried to hold myself together for the rest of class, which apparently didn't work very well, judging by the worried looks my classmates had given me. I really didn't want to worry anyone. I didn't want to talk about it, but most of all, I was embarrassed. I especially dreaded it when Mr. McVeigh asked me to stay back after class, sensing my obvious distress. Now, let's get one thing straight. I'm not the type to cry in front of people. So I couldn't understand what had caused me to break down in the middle of class, in front of all my classmates. I really beat myself up over that one. But the end of class had come, and all I wanted to do was go to my room and crumple. I was so embarrassed, like dropping your plate and smashing it in front of the entire dining hall type of embarrassed. But Mr. McVeigh took it like a champ. Despite the look of terror on his face, like he blamed himself for my distress, he passed me the box of tissues, which was sitting on the table, and asked me what was wrong. I liked that he didn't start with, "Are you okay?" Because obviously, I was not. I hate phrases like, "Are you okay?" because we're programmed to automatically say, "yeah," even when we're not. It's like asking, "How are you?" We're programmed to say, "good," even when we are, in fact, not good. Anywho, it all came pouring out. Words, tears, snot, and all. It was probably a lot for him to process, but here's what I tried to express to him between sobs. I don't think most of us realize, but as kids we absorb a lot, sometimes more than we even realize in the moment. As a little girl, I loved hanging out with my dad, Papa, as I called him. He was the epitome of a protective figure. In my early memories of him, he was always so animated and lively, the type of guy who could talk and laugh with anyone. He would swing me around and put me on his shoulders, and he would take me places. A trip to the store with him was an adventure. And like every little kid, I looked up to him with the kind of reverence people looked up to their idols with. I was 12 years old when Meme, my dad's mom, died. She was the type of woman to raise 13 kids on her own with an iron but loving fist. I had never met my grandfather because he died when my dad was 14. I can only imagine how much that strengthened my dad's and Meme's relationship. She was his rock. Her funeral was the first time I'd ever seen him cry. After that, he became withdrawn, quiet, and I stopped seeing much of him because he was always tired or asleep. One day, I came home from school and he wasn't home. I asked my mom where he was. She told me he was away and that he would come back soon. I didn't know what away meant, but I shrugged it off and went about my day. The day turned into a week into a month, and a month into 2. My dad still hadn't come back. By this point, I was told that he was in the hospital. Now he was away getting better. Yeah, because that clarified a lot. She would often go visit him, leaving my siblings and I at home, wondering if this was the time he would come back with her. I would later learn how exactly he was admitted into the rehabilitation center, that my mom was looking for him and called the police before they found him, wandering around in the street at night. I would also learn that people sometimes don't get over their sadness. One night, she came back home alone again, and I remember that being the night I pleaded into my pillow, asking God to bring him back to me. And the first time I really felt like he wouldn't come back. He eventually did come home, but roles in the household had switched. The dynamic skewed. I was now the one protecting him, coddling him because I knew he was sick. But I didn't know how exactly yet. All I wanted to do was take care of him. That's around the time I stopped calling him Papa and started calling him just Dad. Life went on like that for 2 more years. And by 14, I had realized a few things. With some research online, I had a hunch that my dad was suffering from depression. This was around the time when his diabetes was also getting worse. I grew angry at the fact that no one was talking about it, that the subject was tiptoed around, as if I were some little kid, too brittle to be told the truth. It started having a negative effect on our relationship. I took his withdrawal as apathy, and I thought that he simply didn't care about anything. So my anger became directed towards him. I was angry when I saw him drink as if he didn't care for his health and was unwilling to get better. I was angry that he didn't acknowledge what was going on. I was angry just looking at him. But my anger would turn into guilt because I was doing the same by not talking either. I was being selfish, that my mom and siblings were probably going through the same thing. I just didn't know how to express myself. I mean, what was I supposed to say? Hey, Dad, are you depressed? So it just became easier to avoid it. But again, anger turned to guilt because a part of me knew he couldn't help it. This was around the time I was given the opportunity to go to boarding school. A part of me loved the idea of independence, but the other part of me was just exhausted at home, so Brooks became an escape. It took me 3 years here to realize that running, avoiding, and brewing in my thoughts wouldn't be of any help. Which brings us back to that Saturday in this chapel basement during that oratory class. That's what bottling it up did. At the very beginning of my senior year, my dad became hypoglycemic. That's when you have diabetes and your blood sugar levels skyrocket. He was admitted into the hospital, and for 2 weeks, we didn't see him. For 2 weeks, I was reminded of those 2 months back when he was first admitted into rehab. I had spent the last 3 years of my life tiptoeing around him, afraid of his sickness, of saying the wrong thing, internalizing my emotions. My mom went to see him and came home with a picture. Seeing him in that picture, so helpless, connected to all the IVs, the antithesis of who I knew as my papa, broke me. All I wanted to do in the moment was hug him, tell him how much I loved him, and that I didn't see him as any less of a person because of his illness. It then struck me that it could now be too late, and that I had potentially wasted 3 years when it would have taken but 15 seconds to tell him all those things. Which brings me to Thanksgiving break. The notion of Thanksgiving, being grateful one day out of the year, really irks me. In my humble opinion, people really need to spend less energy on a turkey and more into being grateful for something small every day. So I force myself to be grateful for my blessings, no matter how menial. Because I know tomorrow isn't promised. Words spoken by that student in that chapel last year, and ones that stick to me to this day. And to Julia Moore, I completely empathize with her feelings of guilt, shame, confusion, and sadness. But I can't help but think about the fact that my dad is still here. I still have the chance to tell him how grateful I am he is alive and how much I love him despite my anger. I urge all of you guys to think about that one thing you've always wanted to say to someone and go do it. I'm so serious, go do it. And to conclude, if you can tell by now, this is me being vulnerable. I never would have thought that I would be sharing this with so many people, but I wanted to be brave for once. I also wanted to thank Mr. McVeigh for making me cry that day. I know it wasn't his intent, but I'm glad it happened. I was too embarrassed in the moment to realize it, but I needed to let it out and face it. It let me hear, so I'm extremely grateful. And I also just wanted to say that I'm really proud of myself, both for coming up here and speaking a bit on my story, and for the fact that my kitchen now looks amazing. Thank you.